What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the Cutlass Board Games channel. And like we often do, we have upload on a clock tower video. This is my top 5 tips to brand new storytellers. Maybe you got a grimoire for Christmas. Maybe you've been going to your local group and you are excited to pick up and start storytelling for yourself. And you've run a couple of games and you're wondering what kind of things you need to be mindful of so that you can become a better storyteller. This is for you. Recently, with our local group, we've had a couple of people pick up storytelling and starting to run a few things. We've had a couple of wonky games, and it gave me some ideas about some things that I wanted to kind of tell them. And then I figured there's probably a lot of other people in the same scenario, and I want to kind of run through it all with you. So here's some of the things that I'm always keeping in mind when it comes to storytelling, and some things that are things that you could be focusing on to become a better storyteller yourself. So let's kick it off with number 1. Understanding minion balance. So pretty much all script balance comes together with how you're putting things into the bag and understanding how the different characters are going to interact so that you can potentially have a balanced game. And I'll put up some examples. For example, the pit hag cannot stop a seamstress from getting first night info because the pit hag has an asterisk and the seamstress does not. If the seamstress does act straight away, the pit hag could not have turned them into an outsider to prevent them from using their ability. And this is just one scenario upon these things could happen. Obviously, they will interact in different ways sometimes, but knowing that you might have characters that will prevent things from happening only within a certain time frame, knowing that you'll have other ones that interact with that will be good. On Sex and Violets, most of the things is information and misinformation, but when you start to get into some crazy homebrew stuff, it gets a little bit more complicated, where some information isn't necessarily just information. Some of it is mechanical and how things are going to happen, which becomes important in knowing how they're going to interact. But an example is understanding what kind of damage a minion can do to the timing of a game. For example, the Serenovus, because in a 7-player game, there's only 3 executions. If the Serenovus activates, it's most likely going to be executing a good player, which means that they're losing a player who was probably not a demon candidate, and they're losing a whole day's attempt at executing the demon. In a 7-player game, that means 1/3 of the attempts on the demon has been removed by the Serenovus ability. Now, the Serenovus ability does 2 things. The first one is that a player is mad suck trying to claim a thing, and they are unable to participate in presenting all of their information necessarily, and all this kind of stuff, which is fine for the Serenovus to never execute someone if that first thing is upheld. That's the bargain. If someone is executed, then it confirms the Serenovus is in play, people understand the madness is going to be existing, and then they have to play around that. Giving multiple Serenovus executions is insanely brutal, and I would never do it on the final day to end the game. The Serenovus should never end the game, because if the final day is 3 people, you have the demon, you have the Serenovus, and you have the good player. If the Serenovus activates on the final day and executes somebody, the evil team auto wins. That is you as a storyteller choosing for the evil team to win. And I don't think that that is fair and balanced. So understanding how and when these things should activate, because it is up to you, the storyteller, to judge whether or not madness has been broken in this example, is a good indicator of understanding minion balance. And then the last one is the spy. So the spy means, well, the spy has 2 main abilities, right? The first one is that it registers good sometimes. And the second one is that you get to see the grimoire. Seeing the grimoire, and especially online versus in person, seeing the grimoire means the evil team is always going to make the best choices when it comes to killing at night. If the demon receives the grimoire information, they will always know what all the hot targets are, and they'll be able to make the best choices. Which means, if you have exactly 1 each night info character on the good team, and then the spy tells the demon who that is, then the good team will lose all of their night info. And that makes the game really hard to solve. And the second thing is the spy misregistering. So if the spy misregisters, and let's say, for example, you have a washerwoman that sees the spy as something, and the spy becomes confirmed as whatever the washerwoman saw, that is 1 less good player that could have been confirmed. You need to have a good reason for that misregistering to happen, right? You need to have plenty of other good things happening for the good team to have someone's whole ability malfunction to have that balance, right? If you don't have enough, because the spy is doing both of these things at the same time, right? If you have a librarian that sees the spy, that librarian is not confirming a good player. If you have just a fortune teller as your each night thing, when the imp kills the fortune teller on the first night, you've got 2 players that contributed nothing to solving the game and finding the demon. In a 7-player game, you have the imp, the demon, 2 useless players. You need to have 3 other characters that are going to be able to solve the game. And keeping that maths in mind, a lot of this is going to be maths. Keeping that maths in mind is how you're going to get a better grip on balancing your setups. All right, let's go into thing number 2. Thing number 2 didn't resize when I tried to resize everything. And I have a hunch that a lot of the other ones are going to be like this, annoyingly. Okay. Understanding pacing and timing. Now, Batman Rising is a fantastic example for this one, because pacing and timing in Batman Rising is really obvious. Something that prevents death adds time to the game. Something that adds death removes time from the game. You want a mix of both. The Courtier, if they successfully hit the demon, will prevent 3 nights of death. If that demon is a Poe, right, in 3 nights, it could kill once, charge once, kill 3 things. The Courtier is potentially prevented 4 deaths. Same with the Shabaloth. Across 3 nights, you would possibly have 4 deaths, depending on how many regurgitations you have. And the Courtier removing 4 deaths from the game adds 2 days to the game. And that kind of maths is pretty equitable across the board, depending on what it is. And so when you have stuff like the Sailor and you get to choose when something is protected or not, you need to think about how long this game is going to go. My rule of thumb is I think that most games around 10 players should be an hour, and then 12, 13, 14 plus should be an hour and a half. I do pretty good at keeping stuff within that time frame. You got to keep your days punchy, keep a timer on for how long everything is going to be. Don't fuck around with nominations and executions. Make sure things are at a pace. Make sure people are keeping on topic. One of the main pieces of advice that I got early on was that the longer the day goes, the more time, the more likely the good team is going to win. So if you keep it consistent all the time, you have a pretty good number of minutes. Normally what I do is the number of players divided by 2 is how many minutes they have on the first day, and then every day after that is minus 1 minute. And then you should roughly have 1 minute on the final day, and then nominations and executions should be basically straight away. Which means that like nominations and executions still going to have a little public discussion about what's going on, but that first minute is we don't have the pressure of this happening. We are talking about the game, and then okay, now we're going to start doing nominations and stuff like that. And that pacing seems to work really well for me. But yeah, every 2 players killed or protected removes or adds an extra day to the game, and there's a pattern that you can see with this. Basically, if you had a look before a second ago, we had the 7-player game has 3 executions, right? Because you have an execution, you have a death at night. You have an execution, you have a death at night. That is the final day. You have your final execution. That's execution number 3. So the default days per players assumes 1 execution, 1 death at night, and then possible changes to this should be compensated for. In a 7-player game, if you have a Poe charge in the first night, you get an execution. If you then have Poe kills 3, you're on your final day. And so knowing this, knowing how this is going to work, you need to figure that out. If they don't execute a good player on that first day in that 7-player game, and then the Poe charges, and then it's going to kill 3 people, there's going to be 2 evil alive and 1 good player. And that 1 good player needs to be able to at least have a 50-50 shot at solving the game. I think about this kind of stuff a lot, but also I'm trying to keep the game moving along at a pace so it's not dragging. If it feels like it's dragging, people are having a shit time, then it gets really rough. It's a lot harder to keep, you want to keep things fun. You're here to enjoy the game. You got to keep the energy high. You got to keep people moving through the narrative and solving the puzzle and playing the game, which is the main thing. All right, here is another one that I need to resize for you because I messed up setting up my slides. So this is understanding pacing / timing part 2, and my third fantastic storyteller tip. This one is really interesting because this is one that I catch a lot of experienced storytellers doing wrong, and it really irritates me. So asking a player how they wish to die serves a specific purpose. It's for players brand new to the game, and it's to encourage them to speak up and contribute. In a 15-player game, timing is more important, so you should be keeping things short and punchy. You don't need an elaborate story about how each person dies, or fires a Slayer shot, or does any public action like that. You are here to facilitate a game. If they are stopping to listen to you, they are not playing the game. You, as the storyteller, are facilitating a game. You are not playing the game. You are already having the most fun by seeing the chaos ensue by what you've put into the bag and set up in the box. You do not need to be standing there making everyone listen to your elaborate story about what has happened to them. This is not Dungeons and Dragons. Your job is to tell them mechanically what has happened in the game. If you have players that are brand new or are quieter, spotlighting them so they have an opportunity to talk with things like how you would like to die, with things like a big exciting Slayer moment. And if you know that the Slayer moment is going to end the game, you have 40 minutes to tell a fucking story because you are going to have all of this game time shortened for the Slayer shot to go off, and you can make a big show of it. Understanding how much extra time you are going to add to something is important because, and I swear this to you, any player who is playing this for the first time would rather their first experience be shorter and they understand what's going on and they figure it all out, and the mistakes that they make, are swept along quickly so they can get into the next game and start playing and start understanding more, instead of sitting there and grinding through everything. And there's 15 players and we have to hear 13 stories about how each one of them dies. It's not necessary. You can skip it, you can move on. It is a tool that you have to help particular players get used to this format of game, where talking is the main way that the game is played, and it is important to use it for just that. It is not necessary most of the other times. When you have a full group of experienced players, skip it. If you want to say something funny, keep it to one sentence. An elephant sat on you and you died. A rock fell on your head and you died. It doesn't really make any sense because you were executed by the town. They got together and killed you. But it's punchy and it's interesting and it keeps things fresh. Keep it to that. Don't do anything longer than that. I would rather you said nothing funny the entire time and the game went for an hour and a half than you said the funniest thing I've ever heard in my life and the game went for 2 hours. I don't think that's a hot take, but that's my advice to you, a new storyteller. We then have our next one, which is your power to balance as the storyteller. Your power to balance as the storyteller is not infinite, but it's more than you think. Being poisoned or drunk does not mean you must receive misinformation. Any mechanical ability will do nothing, so a poison slayer will always miss. That's fine. But sometimes the good team needs help getting information. That means, and sometimes correct information can be more detrimental to the good team than misinformation. So it is your job. Anytime someone is poisoned or drunk and they receive information, you as a storyteller is told you can tell them whatever you think is best. But you must keep in mind, it is your job to provide a balanced, fun game, which means making a call on who is winning and trying to keep it even. Which means sometimes you'll go, okay, the evil team is so far ahead here that I need to give the good team something helpful. I ran a game recently where we had a fortune teller who was the drunk, and it was a spy game. And the spy had given all of the kills to the demons, and the good team was executing all the wrong people. And so the best choice was to give the fortune teller all correct information. They never selected the demon, but they got a lot of no's on people that made it helpful. They selected the red herring, and I told them, no, it was not the demon, which is something I can do because they are drunk, and it helps the good team get back towards a more balanced state and be able to solve the game. And because they show up as the drunk in the grimoire, the spy is less likely to make the demon kill them. So their information actually being helpful became very relevant. Every other character was not very helpful or useful, and so this drunk fortune teller was the only person they really had solving the game. And sometimes it means making a call that you can try and figure that out. One of the things that I think of a lot is 3 evils alive on the final day is a failure state. This means that the good team did not have enough information to execute the right people, and the evil team just sat there and went, it's that guy. And the good team was like, all right, we'll vote on it, I guess. And then they had all 3 evil people alive, and you didn't get a climactic final day. The whole point of the game. is that it slowly narrows until you have the final three. And then you have the climactic final day where everyone must present their case, build the entire worldview, and solve the puzzle and say this person is the demon. You want to have at least a 50-50 for the good team. So the demon and one really good demon candidate. And then based on how they are able to unravel that should be the climactic finale of the game. 3 evil people alive on the final day, that doesn't happen. The game just ends because there's no good players left alive, and that is not very climactic or fun. The good team gets to the end of that game and they go, oh, well, that sucked. We had nothing, did nothing, solved nothing, and you want to avoid that. I recommend against it. And then here is our last piece. You are the host of the debate. You are the host of the banquet. You are the person in charge of who talks. You always choose who talks. And this is often just spotlighting the nominator or the nominee. You'll see whenever I am running a game, I am telling people to talk. I say nominations are open. Please nominate. And if people aren't nominating, I am like second call for nominations. I want to see people nominated. I am pushing people to make these choices. And then when they do nominate, I will go, okay, person X has nominated person Y. Person X, please tell us why you have done this. And then once they have a natural pause, I go, okay, person Y, why should we not execute you? And I'm saying, it is your turn to talk. I need you to tell us this thing. And I'm pushing them to be saying stuff always. Quieter players who are struggling to be heard will often need your help to get the spotlight. You can kind of tell. Sometimes they will start to say something can be interrupted. And then this is when you go, no, everyone, I want to hear from this quiet person right now. I want to hear from person Z. Whatever they have to say is important right now, or whatever. You don't need to justify why it's happening, but giving them an opportunity to talk is going to be important. No player is ever going to come back and play your game if the thing that they have to do is talk and they never get an opportunity to do it. That isn't a giant revelation, honestly, but it's your job as a storyteller to give everyone the same opportunity. You will notice players that are really loud and dominant and always talking over other people, telling them to, hey, look, we can get to that in a second. I want to hear from this person. Will help that person a lot to try and get that. Sometimes something generic aimed at the group is not enough. Sometimes you have to absolutely babysit certain players. And especially if you have these really dominant people that take up a lot of space in the conversation are evil. They get a huge advantage from dominating the conversation and steering it away. And it's what we call a minion circus. The minion circus just makes so much noise that no genuine discussion can happen. And it's really frustrating as a good player to play against. You could be a good player that was like, look, I Raven keep it and I saw the demon. I know that guy is the demon. We'll win the game if we execute that guy. But if no one hears you say it, your job is to convince the entire town to vote for this thing. And if no one can ever hear you say that thing, the one thing that you did this game was useless. And that player is not going to come back and play again with this group. So it's your job to watch a debate. Actually look at how they format things. Because they'll go, okay, this is the discussion point. This is your turn to say your first thing. This is your turn to say your first thing. Does anybody else want to add anything to this? Is there any relevant questions to this? Excellent. And then you move on. Your job is to very clearly announce what is happening. Who is nominated? How many votes? You go, okay, player X is nominated. It is 7 votes to execute because that is, the previous person had 7. So it'll be like, okay, 7 to tie, 8 to die. Making it really clear who is nominated, how many votes are required. Saying how many minutes people are going to have for the day. Keeping things short and punchy. You'll notice at the beginning of every single game, I'll go, look, I have died. I'm your favorite storyteller of all time. I have died. Only a demon could have done this. You will have 5 minutes for the first day. Please play below my clock tower. Every single day after that, I won't even announce really what the timer is. I'll just put it up there, but that's because it's the online thing. It's like really obvious to see. In person, I will say, look, you'll have this much time, and I'll put a timer on my phone. And then I'll be, all right, everyone back to your seats now. It's time. We're going to do nominations and executions, and we kind of run through the whole thing. It's really important to keep people on pace. It's really important to keep things moving along. And it's really important to give everybody an opportunity to say something. You see the grimoire, you know how important a particular person's piece of information might be. Them sitting on it and not doing anything is awful. I played a game once. On the final day, the Slayer was still alive and had not used their ability. And the game ended and they executed the wrong person. And the Slayer could have slayed the other person who didn't get enough votes. And they could have potentially had a sure thing at the game. But they said that they didn't feel comfortable using that ability because it was too hard to be like, hey, I want to do this thing. And there is going to be players like that, and it's your job as a storyteller to make sure that they have as much of a good time as the loud, boisterous, cantankerous players, and that's part of the challenge. I'm happy to be an arsehole to people. I kind of am normally. It's not really that hard. But bullying people to making them make the good choices so that everyone can have a good time sometimes is what you have to do. You got to be the boss. You're running the game. You're running the game. You've got to make sure that it's balanced. You've got to make sure that everyone has a chance to have their say, and you've got to make sure that everyone has more fun than you do. As a storyteller, you are automatically having more fun than everybody else. So it is your job to try and make everyone else have more fun than you. And that's my top 5 tips. I know they're kind of aggressive. That's just, I don't know, how I feel about the game, really. There's a lot of just kind of these basic things that people learn from watching other people running it and not understanding the purpose or why, or just have played a lot of games and don't understand how these things are made. And when they put stuff in a bag and they kind of run things out, you don't get that same feeling of it because they never really were taught or they never had somebody show them how to do storytelling. Stephen Medway, the creator of the game, was the one that taught me how to storytell because I was part of the one of the first playtesting groups in Sydney. And seeing him and how he runs stuff and seeing Evan and how Evan runs stuff, Evan is really good at making sure that everyone knows what's going on, making sure that everyone knows whose turn it is to talk. And those kind of things are really important. And it is a really good skill to pick up, not just for running Clock Tower, but social situations in general. I understand that there's someone that's struggling to try and say something. They will feel really happy that you've given them an opportunity to speak and they feel listened to. And all of those kind of things are great and can contribute to what makes Blood on the Clock Tower fun. So keep these things in mind when you are storytelling your next game, and maybe it'll make things go a little better.